welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and thank you for joining us here on the program as we come your way Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., and our special edition of Tell Me Your Story, Wednesdays at 9 a.m. We are streaming live at those times at richarddugan.com. We also have these programs as podcasts on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and a whole lot of other locations on the internet, too numerous to mention at this particular point. We also have a video cast. You can actually watch these videos. I hope that you will take the time to go to Tell Me Your Story on YouTube and watch these videos and even subscribe. I would greatly appreciate that. That would be very nice if you did that. And we also hope that if these programs resonate with you, if they touch a nerve, maybe tug a heartstring, or just are interesting to you and you'd like to be a part of the work that we're doing here, we would greatly appreciate any financial support that you can provide us. We do have a PayPal account for your security as well as ours. We also ask you to participate in the Decade of Perfect Vision, the 2020s, where we ask you to spend time going within, listening to that still small voice in that quiet, peaceful, calm place, and just take it easy. We're all in need of that, especially as we move through these very tumultuous days of summer and fall. I don't know if you're dealing with any kind of natural or man-made disasters around you, but all kinds of stuff is happening, so take that time to put yourself at ease and at peace and find the answers that you're looking for. Our program today is going back to my early years. I was born in 1960, so I didn't get to participate, I was going to say much, at all, in what is referred to as the sexual revolution. Well, our guest today is going to kind of take us back to those days in a book that he's written, a novel, that he is sharing with us. It's called Sex, a Love Story. It delivers intimate tales, an intimate tale, I should say, of fledgling romance. And I am very grateful that we are able to have with us Jerome Gold. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Richard, for having me.
This is an interesting conversation we're going to have because obviously we could sit here and we could certainly dialogue about the novel. I would encourage more people to go to Amazon, for example, and order a copy of the book Sex and read what you've written, Sex, a Love Story. It almost seems, on the one hand, maybe on the surface, Jerome, when you say Sex, a Love Story, it's sort of almost redundant. And yet at the same time, I also know that there doesn't have to be love or a love story involving sex. I'm curious as to how you, as if I'm correct on this, your sort of foundations are in anthropology. You're an anthropologist. Right. How this particular subject, and especially taking us back to the early days of the sexual revolution with these two young people, how that came about?
I don't know that the story originated in anthropology. Of course, my studies in anthropology have affected my thinking. Mm-hmm. The story came about actually by accident. To me, it was an accident. When I was 18, I had a girlfriend. We were seniors in high school, and we were close. And like those kinds of relationships usually do, we eventually parted. And 50-some years later, I got this phone call from her. She had tracked me down in Seattle. I was living in Seattle at the time. And she just wanted somebody to talk to. And she remembered she enjoyed talking with me. And so we started talking about our lives together and then people we knew. And it was a series of phone calls and emails that went on for quite a long time, for about 2 years. And I started taking notes. I kept a journal. I do keep a journal. I started taking notes in the journal. After a fairly short time, I realized that my impulse in writing in the journal is I was getting away from veracity, as getting more into fiction. And I would have to restrain myself to keep from doing that. In other words, the people I was writing about were no longer true to life. They were true to more and more to my imagination. And so I just went with it. It sounds easier than it was. It took me 2 or 3 years to write the book. But that's how it started. It's just the way my mind works. You start with something that's with a memory, say, and then it goes from there, and then you're no longer dealing with the people you started with. Other people's stories come in, stories I make up come in, all to develop the character or characters. So,
and this particular work takes place, what, in the late 1950s into 1960s, correct?
yeah, it's from about 1960 to 62, just at the very end of the Eisenhower era and the beginning of the Kennedy era.
And that was sort of the beginning of the sexual revolution of sorts, was it not?
Yeah, but we know that now.
Yeah,
at the time.
Yeah. Hindsight being what it is.
Yeah.
Now I have to say that I probably had my revolution, as it were, probably in my mid-late 30s, even though I had been married before in early 1980s. It was after my divorce that things really changed in that regard. In terms of and we'll talk a little bit about this right now, in terms of the two characters, the two main characters, they're teenagers, what, 16, 17, 18?
Yeah, I think when they start, he's 17, she's 16. Their birthdays are in the same month in the autumn. And so soon afterwards, he turns 18, she turns 17. Yeah. That's when they start. Yeah. The course of the book, for the most part, goes on for 2 years. And then, of course, late in the book, we jump ahead in time.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the main message that you are looking to get across through this particular novel, what are you trying to say to the reader? Anything in particular, or just to weave a story?
No, there is something in particular, and I'm not sure when I discovered this. I think the theme had been in my mind all along. I used to work in a prison for juveniles. I was a counselor for juveniles, and I can't hear you. I can't hear you, Richard.
No, go ahead. Continue. I'm just curious as to, this process that you went through that brought this message out.
Well, I used to work with most of the kids I dealt with in the prison had been abused sexually or physically or both. And if they were abused by their parents, nevertheless, they still loved their parents, no matter which one was abusing them. They still loved them. Could not help it. And I suppose it's because they're born with that. They're born with a devotion to their mothers. I mean, she's a source of food. And at least at first, the father's probably not beating them if he beats them later. There was that fascination about love, at least that kind of love. And I carried that over into the book. But I went where the book took me, and I discovered that, and for me, writing is an act of discovery. And I discovered that no matter what happens, once you've loved somebody, that love never goes away entirely. It may be overlaid with all sorts of other things that have gotten in the way of the relationship, but it's always there. And under some circumstances, it can come back. So that's the thing.
I know too that long relationships. I can speak more secondhand, granted. My parents just recently celebrated their 65th wedding anniversary. My father turned 90 here in August. Mother will be 87 in September. And I have no doubt that they both love each other still very much. But I also believe that it has changed. It is not the same as it was when they first met in their 20s before they started the family. And it seems to me that there are those who, in a long-term relationship, they watch the emotions, I'll say, mellow, okay, as does fine wine, so to speak, using that old cliche-ish analogy. And all of a sudden, one of them, somehow a switch is flipped, and they want to go back to the passions and the intensity of 20, 30, 40 years ago. And if they can't get it, then usually there's a divorce. Hey, it's unreconcilable differences because he or she can't give me what I want. And it just seems to me that it's looking at love in a very conditional way. And I'm curious as to your thoughts, especially in regards to this couple, but maybe even in terms of if you feel free enough and open enough to share, even in your own relationship. You seem to have been married for quite a number of years as well, and I'm sure that your relationship with your wife has changed. It has grown, it has deepened, but it certainly doesn't have the same passion and intensity that it did when you first met. Would I be fair in making that assumption?
Yeah, I think if you look at my face on the monitor here, you would realize that I've kind of been through the wars. Well, I think you're right. Yeah, sure. Biologically, it can't sustain itself. There's all this, especially dealing with teenagers, where the book starts. There's all this hormonal rage at the same time. There's nothing they can control it to some extent if they want to. I've met kids who think that every time they get horny, they're supposed to do something about it. That could be a problem for them. It could be a problem for anybody.
Yeah.
But over time, you just can't sustain that kind of sexual impulse or sexual activity. It deteriorates over time. I had a friend years ago who was quite a bit older than I was. And I remember he was in his 80s, and he told me that that the sexual urges had finally left him. And he said, "Good riddance."
Jerome Gold is our guest here on the program, and we're talking about his latest work, which is entitled Sex, a Love Story. We hope you'll go to Amazon and pick up a copy of the book. We'll link to that page where you can order your own copy of the book. I think it'll be a fascinating read. I think it'll be a lot of fun as well. And we hope that you will stay with us here on the program as we talk about sex and love and all of the aspects of relationship as it pertains to our guest, Jerome Gold. And I am your host, Richard Dugan, and we are here on Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. I will tell you, Jerome Gold, author of Sex, a Love Story, that I'm 61. And when I was growing up in my late teens and 20s, my biggest problem when horny or wanting to just have a girlfriend, period.
Yeah.
My problem was desperation. And it seems to me that and I've heard this, as a matter of fact, I was told right away, said, look, if you continue to come from a position of desperation, the girls, they will see it coming a mile away. So you need to calm down. And as the phrase goes, let the universe work it out for you. The right person will come along at the right time and all that kind of stuff. And here I am in my early 60s. And I don't know. I don't know when it happened for you, if it's happened for you. I don't want to make assumptions here. But I've been through some changes in my life, and quite honest, I'm not going to necessarily go to the point where saying, okay, sex drive, good riddance, per se. But I will say that my libido, it's like, I don't know where it went. And I'm expected to, to find it. And I'm wondering, is this a problem? And now this is kind of, I don't know if this is an area within anthropology that you have ever studied. But do you think that this has been a problem down through the centuries as people have gotten older? Now, granted, people didn't live that long, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600 years ago, So they were still in their prime usually when they died. But nonetheless, you still had that situation for those who did. And I just find that our society is so, and I'm not going to criticize our society for being so sexualized. I mean, we see it television and movies and so forth. It's always been that way. And I'm wondering if you think that maybe that has been a detriment from that standpoint to finding real love and a real love story for someone and some real meaning. What are your thoughts in that regard?
To the extent that we have volition, I mean, that the society we happen to live in, I'm looking at it as an anthropologist now, that the society as we happen to live in allows us to act on our own volition. We probably get into more trouble that way. I've just been recently been writing about a society where it's a Muslim society, and so men who of certain wealth are allowed to have up to 4 wives. As they get older, the wives get younger, and that could be a problem because not that much writing has been done about the wives, but they have their own desires and needs too.
Sure. And
so this one society where is an example of, first, the man, her husband, did not want another wife. He already had 2, and he was under pressure because of his wealth. Relatives were telling him to take a 3rd wife. He really didn't want a 3rd wife, and his first wife, who was his closest companion as well, did not want him to take another wife, but he finally did, and it didn't work out. And the 3rd wife eventually took a young lover about her own age, and it was very frustrating for the man. I mean, it was a humiliation for him, but also he just didn't feel that close to her. So that could be a problem where one person, say the man takes a young wife and she has her own libido, he has his libido, and there's a mismatch. Maybe at first in the relationship there isn't, but soon enough there will be a mismatch. So I'm in my 2nd marriage. We've been married for about 16 years now. And both my marriages were women of around my own age. I think that works out pretty well. It turns to, if it's successful, I think it turns to companionship as you get older. I had a friend, when I was in my 20s, I had a woman friend. She was in her 20s, and she wanted to get married. There were a couple men she had in mind, and one was older and one was younger. And she turned it that way, whether she wanted that kind of sexual intensity that she loved, or whether she wanted companionship that she knew would last. She finally wound up marrying a third person who was neither one of them. So.
You know, you touched upon something that I want to talk about as we move forward here. You brought it up in the context of the Muslim faith. And I want to expand on that just a little bit as we continue here. We're talking with Jerome Gold, author of Sex, a Love Story. We hope you'll get a copy of it at Amazon. I'm curious, is there a particular website that you would recommend people go to if they're interested and they say read Sex, a Love Story, that would maybe be beneficial for them if they were curious and wanted to continue maybe, I don't know, investigating the subject matter, not necessarily the fictional characters, because those are yours. But in terms of maybe continuing on, is there any place? And if not, that's fine too.
Well, you could find these books on Amazon. There's particular books, a particular author that stuck in my mind ever since I read her, Anais Nin. I think some people pronounce Anais Nin, who wrote a series of diaries that was had a series of diaries published in the 70s that were very popular. And she also wrote some erotica. One of the books is called Delta of Venus, the erotica. She had a long-term relationship with Henry Miller, the American author. And she wrote about that too. What makes her books better than most erotica, for my taste at least, is that she also deals with the emotional parts. Those are more important for her, and as they are for me. So I would recommend people read Anais Nin if they're interested in the emotional aspects of sexuality.
I know that's brought up quite often to teenagers in that respect, that, don't just go out there and have frivolous, there are emotions involved. And I mean, they lay out the whole thing, for the teenager. And of course, in some instances, they'll pressure and wait until marriage and all that. And I don't know which is better or worse, but we'll talk a little bit more about that as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, and we hope that you will stay with us as we continue talking with Jerome Gold. He is the author of Sex, a Love Story, and we're talking about a lot of different things. What area of anthropology was your main focus? Because I know it's a big, big area.
Yeah, there's in the United States, at least, there's 4 different aspects of anthropology. There's linguistics, social or cultural anthropology, archaeology, and physical anthropology. I think probably most people, when they think about anthropology, are really thinking about the physical anthropology. But I was in social anthropology, so my subjects were live people. I went overseas to live for a while with in some villages on an island. And my topic, what I was mainly interested in, was human migration, modern human migration. People coming into the island, people leaving the island.
Yeah, it is rather interesting where people migrate to and why. Obviously in our day and age, a lot of people are migrating out of their home countries because of violence. And you sometimes wonder why people migrate, for example, in the United States. Some people will do it for political reasons, which is kind of an interesting reason to move, or migrate to someplace else. But hey, there are all kinds of reasons for doing it. It's fascinating. I wanted to touch upon something you brought up in the Muslim faith, and I'm sure in the Middle Eastern lifestyle, if you will, Saudi Arabia, for example, as well, where the men can have multiple wives, again, depending upon the wealth, up to maybe 4 wives. In the United States, that kind of relationship, and here in the United States, it can work both ways. It's referred to as polyamory. I'm curious as to what you have found in your studies. And again, I understand your main emphasis was on migration. But I'm just curious as to whether or not that was something that has been around. I would think so. And here's the other reason I raise this, because if you were to take a look, for example, at the Genesis story in the Old Testament, where it talks about Adam and Eve, and then there's Cain and Abel. Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Adam and Eve gave birth to Cain and Abel. And then you have that long lineage. It's like, wait a minute, hold it, stop. Where did these people come from? How did these people get created? Who were their parents? And it doesn't say. It just doesn't say. And it's like, what, did they just miraculously appear? Maybe they did. There's obviously speculation that even from the biblical texts that that we've been visited by aliens and maybe they were deposited here. Who knows? But what are your thoughts as an anthropologist on the impact, pros and cons, if you will, of a lifestyle like that that may or may not work?
Looking at it from the outside, if a man takes more than one wife, we say he's polygamous. If a woman takes more than one husband, we say she's polyandrous. But you use the term polyamorous or poly. What was the term you used?
Yeah, it's along those. Not so much polyamorous, but oh boy. Anyway, you have multiple partners. Males can have multiple partners. Females can have multiple partners. And in this day and age, when you've got all of these new splits in gender, it's not just two anymore. Yeah, I mean, you know what I'm talking about.
Right.
And you could have a male lover and a female lover, or partner, however you want to phrase that, or multiple thereof. And we're not talking here about an ongoing orgy. That is not what these relationships are necessarily on the surface, as I have read about.
Right.
That's not what they're about per se. At the same time, usually only two, sleep together, that kind of thing. Maybe for procreation, maybe for pleasure. Do you think that those kinds of polyamorous relationships are or can be beneficial to a society, or do you think they're detrimental to the traditional values that some people in this country hold of a traditional family, mother, father, and children, that they say is undermining the bedrock of society?
Well, most societies are not officially polyamorous.
No, that's true.
And probably all societies are unofficially polyamorous, but not constantly. So in the place where I was doing my field work, I had a really good informant. He spoke really good English, so I didn't have to learn as much as I should have the local language. But we had better conversations than if I had even tried to learn the local language more. So throughout his marriage, and he'd been married 30 some years by that time. Throughout his marriage, occasionally he would have another relationship. Could be male, could be female. But he officially, of course, he didn't. I mean, he wasn't going to talk. Part of that society's ethos was that you can do those things, both men and women could do those things, but you didn't talk about it. And you didn't appear in public with anybody but your spouse. That is, I don't mean in public, but if you went out to a restaurant, it should be with your spouse or for business. I think that's pretty common in the United States too. I think there are many people who have or have had extramarital relationships, but they get by with it. As far as our views about gender identity, I found that the best way for me to think about it between heterosexuality and homosexuality, not dealing with trans, is that it's a continuum. So that my friend, for example, I think he told me about 2 homosexual affairs he had had over 30 years. They're not really affairs, but more encounters, apparently. And but he still regarded himself as heterosexual. And if most of his activity throughout his life was heterosexual, how are we to regard him? There are just ways for us to think about it. The activity itself is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But the labels are just ways for us to think about it. It doesn't, and to give value to one thing over another. I don't know if I've answered your question or not.
Well, I do know too that and I've often thought about this anthropology, and I think oftentimes of how we, when it comes to things we don't fully understand, and they're intangible, like God. We tend to, and we've been doing this for centuries, we anthropomorphize the deity.
Yeah.
We give it a physical form.
Right.
When in fact, most people who listen to this program, myself included, the deity, the divine power, the divine source, the force, whatever you want to call it, has no form. Unless you want to consider us as that form in physical. As, for example, in the Bible, it says that we were made in the image of God, in the image and likeness thereof. But I have to wonder, are they really speaking about the physical body, or are they talking about the essence, that which animates the human body?
I think a lot of it has to do with human relationships. I actually had a pretty in-depth conversation about this with another friend just within the last week, talking about conceptions of God. And she's Catholic. I'm not religious at all. But she said that for her, our daughter, we were talking about our daughter. She's my first wife. Mm-hmm. We were talking about our daughter and on her perception of or conception of God. And that my ex-wife said that for herself, God was love. And I agree with that. But it's not love as a 17-year-old would define it. It's love as a 70-something-year-old would define it. It's a kind of spirituality that does not have form. And yet it's there because you can feel it so strongly sometimes. So some people may call it an aspect of superstition or paranormal, and yet the feeling is so powerful that you know that there's something there. That doesn't mean that something is making decisions. It's just there. So.
We're talking with Jerome Gold, author of Sex, a Love Story, and I myself, it's an interesting dynamic, Jerome. I don't know if maybe you feel the same way that I do, in that I guess I'm in that latter phase that you talk about, where I just want to connect and be in the moment. I don't want to try to achieve anything. I guess I've gotten to the point in my life where, in spite of doing all of these interviews and all of these programs and doing all this production and working with all of the people that I work with to create all of the stuff that people hear and sometimes see, since I also edit video now, there isn't really an achievement in that. There's no end goal per se. But at the same time, it's like I want a relationship that is just here now. Can we not try to make something happen? And I realize that's a frustration for some folks. Another frustration is whenever we have to take a pause here to remind people what they're listening to. And it's Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. And we're talking with Jerome Gold, author of Sex, a Love Story, here on this fine station. It's also podcast. It's also videocast. Go to YouTube and go to Tell Me Your Story. Just look for the guy with the hat. And I'm Richard Dugan, your host, as always, and we're so grateful that we are talking with an anthropologist, a socio-anthropologist. Is that a right term?
Social, not socio.
That would put you in a different category, I think. I'm sure there's an anthropologist for that too, right?
Yeah, we do everything.
Absolutely. But you don't dig in the dirt. And I'm sure you're happy about that, right?
Actually, past few years, I've kind of regretted not having studied a little more of archaeology. I
Ah,
studied when I was preparing for my exams at school. I got my master's degree at the University of Montana. We had to know something about all the different categories of anthropology, and so I did study some archaeology, but I never did go out on a dig. I had friends who did, and I kind of regretted. Now I kind of regret not having done it. I guess there's ways of doing it now, but now I don't know if I want to spend 2 weeks in the summer sun in the United States.
not the summer sun we're getting right now, let me tell you.
Right.
It's it is just a little too intense for. I mean, I was born and raised in Phoenix, Arizona, so I know what intense heat is.
Yeah.
I will never forget my 30th birthday, 30 years ago, 31 years ago. I was bicycling in Phoenix back to and from work in the afternoon. I got off at noon, and there I am bicycling home. I did not know what the temperature was. And I got home and I found out that it was 122 degrees in the shade. And
Yeah.
fortunately, a few years later, I was able to move about 16 years later. 46 summers in Phoenix. That was 45 summers too many. But be that as it may, we're certainly grateful and thankful that you are here with us talking about some of these different subjects. I'm curious, from an archaeological standpoint, are there archaeological finds that sort of that tend to support some of your research study and or conclusions in your field of anthropology?
Well, I haven't really kept up with archaeology, but anthropology as a whole, including all the subdisciplines, has developed a small body of theory that pretty much affects the way we think about everything we do, whether you're a physical anthropologist or archaeologist or cultural anthropologist. Um, so, yeah, we kind of support each other. We argue with each other, and we support each other regardless of what subdiscipline we're in. But at the same time, I would say theory will get you only so far, and then it establishes limits. And I think right now, especially in social anthropology, we're stuck within certain limits that we should be breaking through. But you'd have to fight the establishment on that. And so you probably wouldn't be able to. I mean, there are anthropologists who write papers about really interesting things, knowing they can never get them published officially. There's no journalist going to publish them because there's no body of theory to support it. But at the same time, this is what they found doing field work. And so there's some of us who just share these ideas. But it's all informal, unofficial. So again, I don't know if I've answered your question, but this is something I've thought about for quite a while. The way you grow up in a certain discipline, say it's an academic discipline, you grew up in a certain discipline, and it really carries you into realms that you never imagined existed. But at the same time, it imposes limits on both the way you think and how you express it. And that can be pretty frustrating.
How important do you see these various elements and studies of anthropology to our civilization's future?
Well, especially as we explore, whether it's space or inner space, we have to prepare ourselves, if we're not already prepared, to encounter things we didn't anticipate. And we have to force ourselves to be open-minded. There's ways of doing this, but it all requires effort. And I think most of us are not willing to do that. But most of us are not going to have the opportunity to encounter something we didn't anticipate. Most of us like to live within our comfort zones.
Yeah.
But for those who want to explore, anthropology is a good start, especially anthropology as it's taught to undergraduates, to people going for their bachelor's degrees, where it's all new to them. But they have to be, if they continue beyond that, to go for graduate degrees or become professionals, it's really to their own advantage as explorers to force themselves to open their minds. And that, as you get older, of course, it becomes increasingly difficult.
Would you say that there is a connection, if not a parallel, between anthropology and history, and the adage that unless we learn from history, we are doomed to repeat it?
Well, that's the way I think, but I got my undergraduate degree in history, not anthropology. And so my mentor at the University of Montana, he who also got his undergraduate degree in history, he pointed out to me that not everybody thinks like he and I do. That when we think about anthropology, we think in terms of how things happen historically as well. But many anthropologists don't think that way. They're kind of anti-history, or just don't think about historicism at all. So, but for my thinking, it's a real advantage. Now that I don't have to work for a living, a lot of my reading is, I don't read much anthropology, but I do read increasingly a lot of history. So.
Would you say that as a species, on the whole, that we've actually kind of done a poor job of learning from history?
I don't know if it's if it relates to our species. Certainly, as Americans, we've done a poor job of it, probably because our history is so short compared to other countries. I've spent not a lot of time, but some time in Europe, and I have friends in, say, Italy and Germany, and they're much more aware of what happened in their countries 1,000, 1,500 years ago, especially in Italy. And I don't know if you've been to Rome or not, but Rome, modern buildings side by side with 2,000-year-old ruins. They just take that for granted. But for me, it's really kind of inspiring. So I don't know about it. So again, I don't know about it as a species, but certainly as a country, we've not done well in learning from our history. And for one thing, we're poorly educated in history. We're poorly educated at all, I think, but we're poorly educated in history.
Well, I
there were
remember
years where at least in Washington State, where I live, there were several years in which history was not taught in public schools because the teaching of history was under some political pressure. So the schools just stopped teaching it.
Wow. You kind of need to know where we come from in order to know maybe where we're going. Sometimes I would think. And of course, the biggest dilemma when it comes to history, Jerome, is who tells the story. And obviously, when there are conflicts, it's usually the victor. Until you get down the road many, many decades or centuries, and then artifacts are dug up. I didn't know this. I don't know if you knew this or not. But based upon an article that I read, and I'm gonna stand by the veracity of the article until something comes along to say different. There was actually, people complain about the propaganda wars that we've been going through in the last 6, 7, 8, 9 years, and even during the Cold War. That's nothing. I was reading this article that talked about the propaganda war between the pro and anti-Catholic groups back in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Well, we know who won the war. It was the Catholic Church. But there was a propaganda war, a misinformation, whatever you want to call it, on both sides, I'm sure. And so this is nothing new. And yet we continue to do this. We continue to listen. And we continue to take this stuff in, and it can drive folks crazy. Jerome Gold is my guest. His book is Sex, a Love Story, available through Amazon, Amazon.com. We will be linked so that people can go and pick up a copy of your book and find out more about the work that you're doing. We also hope that you will listen to the podcasts on the various outlets, including SoundCloud and Spotify and iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and other outlets, as well as YouTube, where you can watch these programs on YouTube channel Tell Me Your Story. Just look for the guy with the hat. Not hard to find. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and I thank you so much for being with us here on the program. It's really nice to have you with us, and it's interesting to speak with someone who has been studying. I hope the right word here. I'm choosing the right vernacular here. Who's been studying our society? How far back in social anthropology do you go? What's the date range, the year range?
Well, social anthropology is interested or focuses on living people, on a living society. So when I am preparing to study a society, I read everything I can get on the society. If they're more or less modern and they have writers and artists and all, I read their literature. I read their the history of the societies. I just try to immerse myself in it as much as possible before I even get there.
What was it about anthropology, and obviously specifically social anthropology, that intrigued you so much that became your major, I guess you would say?
Yeah. Well, I loved history, but I didn't see myself spending my career in a library or in libraries. I wanted more adventure in my life. And I just discovered anthropology. I took a class in it when I was an undergraduate, and it intrigued me. And then, so after I graduated from history, I just switched to anthropology. What was best for me at that time, what was best about anthropology is that you could do anything you wanted and call it anthropology. You could study anything you wanted, or study a society in a particular way. At the time, I was interested in social conflict, and I could do that. But in studying my master's degree, my master's thesis was on social conflict, not a particular one, within the United States. And so I dealt with concept of ethnicity, because that was part of it, the way people saw themselves as an ethnic group apart from other ethnic groups. And I also had to deal with social class. And then political, I dealt with propaganda, and that was a lot. It was a big thesis. For a master's thesis, you usually think of something maybe 100 pages long, but mine was 450 pages. My master's thesis was longer than my doctoral dissertation.
I've known a number of people who have gone after their PhDs in particular. I was actually privileged to sit in on the presentation of the thesis, and I believe it's called a refutation, I believe, of the thesis by the mentors that they would go to help to write it, to guide them along as they wrote it.
Yeah, we just call it oral exams.
Oral exam.
Yeah.
I just found that process fascinating. I have to say that I feel as though I should have a PhD in something. I don't know what, maybe comparative studies, just simply because of not only all of the diverse guests that I've had on this program, but all of the diverse guests that have been on all of the programs, literally thousands of programs that I have produced at different stations over the past 40 plus years that I've been doing this work. And the guest, the lineup, I can't even name drop because there are just too many. But it's just fascinating conversations that we have, just like we have here, and we're having here with you right now, Jerome Gold, for conversations regarding talking about relationships and our sex drives, and I've even heard it said, and I don't know if we can touch upon this a little bit, if you've ever studied this aspect of it. I was taking I was in a personal growth program, but they had these wonderful little booster shots every month. On a Monday night, we'd go to a resort and we'd meet in a banquet room, and the facilitator who founded the program would talk about a myriad of different spiritual and esoteric, metaphysical topics. And one of the things he brought up, which I found so fascinating, he says, if you look around, and then, of course, in your mind's eye look around, let's say at the skyline of your city, or maybe even from the space station looking down on the lights at nighttime of the big cities. Everything that has been created was created from sexual energy. Not sex necessarily, but sexual energy. I don't know if this is even anywhere near your wheelhouse, or if you have any thoughts on that construct or not.
I do, but it's not from an academic or an anthropological point of view. It's something I've noticed and that I've read about, that other writers have experienced, that when they're creating, when they're writing, especially if it's a long work, their sexual energy seems to go down. When they finish their project, it shoots right back up. So I think creation has its roots in sexuality, or sexual energy is probably a better term.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it matters at all what direction you're going sexually.
Yeah.
It is just that energy, and I think that's so. I think also there are other things that get in the way, or that have their roots in sexual energy. I think friends of mine who teach writing, or teach writing, don't write while they're teaching. I'm sure there are other people that I don't know who can write while they're teaching, but all that I know, if they're going to get their writing done, it has to be in the summer when they're not teaching. And I've been told that it's the same energy that goes into teaching that goes into writing.
Yeah.
I've never taught writing, so I can't speak from experience, but I've been told that a number of times by different people.
Well, I do know that I love teaching what I know. Obviously, it's broadcasting, production, those kinds of things. I've had some wonderful stints back in the 80s and 90s, standing in front of a classroom and sharing just what I know. I would never share what I don't know, because that's much more difficult. But it's such a thrill. It is so energizing. And I know that comes from that same place, that same space, that same kind of energy. And it truly is amazing when we start looking at it from that standpoint. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we need more or less human beings on the planet. I won't get into that conversation, but I will say that when we begin to recognize how things are created, and it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's writing, whether it's a building, whether it's, whatever it is, that's the energy that's being generated, that's coming up. And it's, to me, I think it's important for us to recognize. And certainly a lot of the ancient wisdom teachings talk a great deal about that from around the world and throughout the centuries.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think creation is what it is, and it does have its roots in sex.
Yeah.
Not sexual activity necessarily,
right,
but the drive for sex.
Right. Let me ask you about your own personal background in regards to the philosophy that you were born and you were raised into as you grew up. And if that's something that has held, or as you have moved through your life, that you have found that it maybe was wanting and you wanted more, or man, that's just fine, I'll stick here because I'm really focused on the philosophy, so to speak, of anthropology, social anthropology.
I think that the way I think, the values I have, I got from my father, and I don't think I've gotten much away from it. I mean, I had my period of rebellion as an adolescent.
Mm-hmm.
Part of that's in the book. But especially, say after I got into my 30s and I had enough years behind me where I could start to reflect a little bit. I realized that a lot of what was important to him is important to me. And a lot of the values we placed on what's happening in the world, at least the way we perceive it, the way he thought is the way I think. And it isn't that I consciously did that, it's just the way it happened. So my father was, nowadays we would say a liberal, but I don't think that term was used in the same way then when he was young. My father was born in 1916. But certainly to the left of center, but at the same time, when it came down to finance, he was pretty conservative, as we would use that term today.
Mm-hmm.
And so am I. Sometimes you have to violate, in my opinion now, sometimes you have to violate your own values for a greater good as you perceive it. But that's just part of life. So I'm thinking about what's the bills before Congress now, or maybe that Schumer has been working so hard to get passed.
You talking about the infrastructure bill?
Yeah. So I think that's a wonderful thing. But it does violate my sense of fiscal what's the word?
Propriety?
Yeah, propriety.
Yeah. And I can see that. Honestly, I can see that because already so much money has already been spent on so many other things, including a lot of the stimulus checks that have gone out over the last 18 months or so, and so forth. I heard a number the other day that our national debt is now approaching, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, and if you know, if not, that's fine. I think they said it was close to $40 trillion.
I have no idea.
But
I know it's a lot.
At the same time, I remember back in the 70s, I kept hearing people talking about how, oh no, debt is good. We need to be in debt and this and that. And I'm thinking, really?
It's interesting. Back in the 70s, it was the Democrats talking that way. And until Biden became president, it was the Republicans talking that way.
Yeah. So, well, okay, folks, we're in debt up to our beyond our eyeballs.
Yeah.
And that's just the way that it is. It's never going to get paid off. I don't see that happening. But let me ask you, as we wrap up our program together here, as just a citizen of America, of the planet, as well as an anthropologist and the study that you do in social anthropology and other areas of your interest, I'm curious, are you optimistic about our future as a country as well as a species for the future?
As a country, I don't think we will be the same as we were before Donald Trump and before COVID. So the idea that everything's going to go back to normal, however we want to define it, we're not going to go back to normal. COVID itself, or what we know about viruses now, and how it has affected, how they have affected us, will not allow that. So I don't know about optimism. but I know it's going to be different. And I couldn't tell you how, but I'm certain it's going to be different. As a species, well, a million years from now, what will we be as a species? I mean, to me, it's not a matter of will we exist or not, but what will we have changed into? Because we're not going to be human as we know it now. A million years ago, we were not human as we know it now, as we know humans. So, one of my books is in a time capsule. Supposed to be time capsules in a digital time capsule. It's held by Amazon, along with other books. It's held by Amazon. 350 years from now, the capsule's supposed to be opened. Well, that's assuming that Amazon's around or has a successor. Assuming that the capsule even exists then. But assuming all that, how will people think 350 years from now? 350 years ago, so what was that? Say 2000, say 1650, late 1600s. We think we can sometimes think like them, but we don't know. Certainly the world they lived in was a lot different from ours. And so I assume that, that's my historicism coming in again, but I assume that 350 years from now, what will it all mean to them now? The values I placed in my book, it was a social commentary. The values I placed there probably could be taken in the inverse by people with different values. It doesn't mean that what I put into it is what they're going to get out of it.
Yeah.
So that's a long way of saying I don't know.
Well, you have 16 books, and folks can get any one of those, I'm sure, through Amazon. I think one of the most fascinating things, and I sort of made a misstatement in one program where I was talking about how, 1,000 years from now, what the heck difference is it going to make? Well, but the things that we do today are going to determine what things will be in 10,000 years. We just don't know. It's. I think it kind of goes back to sort of that butterfly effect. And we can't see into the future. It'd be great if we could, if we had that 20/20 vision. But you and I are here right now because of everything that everybody has done over the last thousands and thousands of years. If they hadn't done what they had done, we wouldn't be sitting here talking. We wouldn't be having this conversation. You wouldn't have written the book that we're talking about, and the list goes on. So it's like, on the one hand, it's not going to make any difference in the grand scheme of things, but the reality is that if humanity does manage to survive another 1,000, 10,000, or million years, it's going to be on the shoulders of every single human being who has come before. Because we all tend to lay that brick, so to speak, on that metaphorical wall, and that kind of thing.
I agree with you. Here's another way of thinking of it that can bring it closer to home for some people. Mm-hmm. Much of the world accepts reincarnation as a fact. Mm-hmm. That if that's true, if there is reincarnation, then I'll die, but I'll come back sometime. The decisions I make today are going to affect whoever I am in another life. So we're stuck with ourselves. We should be treating ourselves better. Another way of looking at it is, what do we want for our children? But that argument doesn't seem to hold much water with an awful lot of people. It makes me wonder how they think of their children, or if they think of their children. But the reincarnation thing is that if you accept that, and of course most Americans probably won't, although many Americans do.
I think it's changing.
Yeah. Then if we destroy our environment, that's that's the environment we're going to be born into at a future time.
It's an uneasy thought. Too many science fiction movies that I have seen, the post-apocalyptic era, if you will. Not very pretty, and it's kind of sort of depressing. And I try to keep an optimistic perspective that we're going to do better over time. We're going to make some of the right decisions, and and we're going to survive. But you know what? Only time will tell, and that's all we can do is wait for time to pass and see where we are tomorrow and the next day and the year and on and on and on into the next millennium. So we'll just keep working, keep doing what we're doing. I think that's really what we have to stay focused on, is what we're doing. And I thank you for doing what you have done and sharing with us, both in the work that you have done through social anthropology, but also through the book, Sex, A Love Story. Now, as I said, you have 16 other books. Are a number of them novels, or many of them dealing with some of the subject matter maybe that we've talked about on the program today?
Both.
Oh, okay. So it's a mixture. Wonderful. So
Yeah.
they'll get a great mixture of reading from Jerome Gold. Jerome Gold. Go to Amazon.com, and I'm sure that they can type that in, and it'll bring up most of the books that you have put out. And we thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me, Richard.
I do have 3 final questions that I do like to ask my guests before we conclude our program. And you may have answered them to some degree during the interview, but I like to ask them directly. But before I do, I need to let you know that you are listening to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, giving you choices and knowledge of those choices. To help make your dreams come true, we are here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., as well as Wednesday mornings at 9 a.m. We stream live at those times at richarddugan.com, and the podcasts for these programs are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and many other locations. And we are also on YouTube, where you can watch these interviews. I hope that you will. And subscribe to both the podcasts as well as the videocast, so that each time I post a new one, you will be notified and you can listen to more interesting conversations with our guests. We also hope that you can support us financially through our PayPal account. All you have to do is go to PayPal, and you want to send money, we would greatly appreciate it. Just use richard@richarddugan.com, and we do that for your security as well as ours. And please participate in the decade of perfect vision, the 2020s. Spend that time listening to that still small voice in that quiet, peaceful, calm place, and get that guidance, that inspiration, that encouragement, gentle speak, if you will, to just kind of soothe you through some of the rough spots in your day. And then you can come back out and just face the day with a whole new perspective on that day. So with that being said, the 3 questions that I like to pose to my guests are, number 1, who is Jerome Gold?
Woof. In 5 words or less, huh? I'm somebody who I've probably spent certainly my adult life, in trying to figure out how things work, how in the human realm, how and why we do what we do. So I think I said earlier that for me, writing is an act of discovery. And I think that's my vehicle for trying to figure out how things work. What's your next question?
Next question. What is it that you hope to or want to achieve with the work that you are doing now?
I want to stimulate people through most of my writing recently is fiction, although I expect to be doing more nonfiction. But whether it's fiction or nonfiction, I hope to stimulate people to one, to think about what they are doing, and if that's what they want to do. And two, I hope to stimulate people to feel things about what they are doing and what the people around them are doing. Mm. I think intellect apart from emotion is not going to get us very far, and emotion apart from intellect would be even worse.
I hear you.
So I try to write in a sense. I'm not so much interested in conveying my thoughts. Well, I am interested in conveying my thoughts, but in such a way as to stimulate people to have their own thoughts and feelings. Hmm. So.
And finally, what is your life's purpose?
I don't know. I feel there is a purpose, that I have a purpose, that we all do. We all have our individual purposes, but I don't know what it is. Increasingly, I base my decisions on, I would call it informed intuition, not impulse, but what I've learned from just patterns I've observed in my own life and in other people's lives. But where I'm going, I don't know. So it can be kind of scary, but it's also really interesting.
Well, thank you so much, Jerome Gold, for joining us here on the program. This has been quite a pleasure, and I thank you for being part of the work that we are doing here to give people choices and knowledge of those choices to help make their dreams come true.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it.
And I thank you for listening and watching. Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, giving you choices and knowledge of those choices. And we hope that you will tune in to our next broadcast, podcast, videocast. And until then, love to lol.